wishes of the committee to Senator Beverly Williams. We note her absence, and we also wish fair travels to Senator Smith, who is away on duty leave. The motion. The motion for the appointment of a special select committee to investigate all documents, communications, and processes tied to the signing of the document titled Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize and Portico Enterprises Limited, DBA, the Port of Magical Belize, dated October 1st, 2020, and to investigate all documents, communications, and processes that resulted in a document titled Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize and Portico Enterprises Limited, DBA, the Port of Magical Belize, dated October 1st, 2020, being presented to Cabinet, accompanied by draft legislation as attachments to Cabinet Confidential Memo number 84 of 2023, dated May 15, 2023. Whereas paragraph D of section 61A2 of the Constitution of Belize provides that among the powers and functions of the Senate is the instituting and conducting of inquiries and investigations on any matter of public interest or importance. At paragraph G thereof, requiring the attendance before it of any chief executive officer in a government ministry in respect of any matter of which he has knowledge by virtue of his office or in respect of anything related to his office and the due execution of his duties, and at paragraph H thereof, requiring the attendance before any committee of the Senate and of any minister of government. And whereas the public has become aware of a signed document titled Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize and Portico Enterprises Limited, DBA, the Port of Magical Belize, dated October 1st, 2020, and given that that document has been subsequently presented to Cabinet along with draft legislation as attachments to Cabinet Confidential Memo number 84 of 2023 with certain recommendations from the Ministry of Finance, Economic Development and Investment in consultation with the Ministry of Tourism and Diaspora Relations and within the context of questions regarding the legality of the contents of that document. And whereas the government has committed to fight corruption and work to restore confidence in government and tabled same in a good governance motion in January 2021 to signal serious about meaningful reform and open and accountable governance to all Belizeans. And whereas the government acknowledges and heeds the call of the citizenry, including several of the social partners represented in the Senate through the Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry, BCCI, and the Belize Business Bureau, BBB, the National Trade Union Congress of Belize, NTUCB, the Belize Council of Churches, BCC, and the Evangelical Association of Churches, EAC, and the non-governmental organizations, NGOs, in recognition that the chronology, communications, and legality tied to and related to this agreement are matters of public importance, and that in the interest of ensuring good governance and compliance with organizational best practice and statutory requirements, it is desirable that the Senate exercises its powers and functions under the Constitution of Belize to conduct an inquiry into and investigate this agreement. And whereas Standing Order number 69 of the Senate Standing Orders, which are further herein referred to, provides for the appointment of a special select committee other than a standing committee by order of the Senate, which shall specify the terms of reference of the committee, including its composition. And whereas Standing Order number 70 provides, among other things, that every select committee shall be so constituted as to ensure, as far as possible, that the balance of the parties in the Senate is reflected in the committee. And whereas Standing Order number 72 provides authority to enable the special select committee to summon witnesses to a sitting thereof, now therefore be it resolved that the Senate shall approve the appointment pursuant to Standing Order number 69 of a special select committee of the Senate, herein referred to as the committee, with the following terms of reference and composition: to conduct an independent and impartial investigation and inquiry into the signing of the document titled Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize and Portico Enterprises Limited, DBA, the Port of Magical Belize, dated October 1st, 2020, and to determine which, if any, established procedures and/or investment policy were followed. To determine what advice, policy, or basis the Ministry of Finance, Economic Development and Investment, in consultation with the Ministry of Tourism and Diaspora Relations, relied upon to prepare Cabinet Confidential Memo 84 of 2023, recommendations and draft legislation, and subsequently submitted for Cabinet's consideration and approval. into all communications and documentations tied to the document titled Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize and Portugal Enterprises Limited DBA, the Port of Magical Belize, dated October 1st, 2020, and into all communications and documentations tied to the document titled Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize and Portugal Enterprises Limited DBA, the Port of Magical Belize, dated October 1st, 2020, being presented to Cabinet along with related draft legislation as attachments to Cabinet Confidential Memo number 84 of 2023 in May 15th, 2023, and with certain recommendations from the Ministry of Tourism and Diaspora Relations. To require the production of such communications and documentations, papers and records as the committee shall deem relevant to the inquiry, and to examine pertinent documentation, to determine whether consequent on the investigation and inquiry, statutory and other procedures were complied with, to require the attendance before the committee of former ministers of government, current ministers of government, signatories of the agreement, and or those who may have information by virtue of his office which may be relevant to the inquiry, pursuant to Section 61A(2)(g) of the Constitution of Belize, to require the attendance before the committee of those heads of departments, regulatory committees, and or those who may have information by virtue of his office or responsible for and involved with the issuance of environmental compliance, clearance permits et al., and or any other official of government who may have information which may be relevant to the inquiry pursuant to Section 61(2)(h) of the Constitution, to require the attendance before the committee of all such current and future public officers in the ministry responsible for the ministries of investment and trade, economic development, finance, tourism, etc., as well as those responsible for ports, environment, etc., pursuant to Standing Order number 72 of the Senate Standing Orders, as well as to produce all relevant communication, papers, and records of the ministry, departments, et al., as may be necessary to conduct its inquiry and investigation, to examine all such persons required to attend before the committee as witnesses pursuant to Standing Order number 72 of the Senate Standing Orders, to hold and conduct its sittings and meetings in public and broadcast live, except for sittings which are held only for the purpose of deliberation of the matters which are subject of the committee, which sittings shall be held in private. That the committee shall hold its hearings with due urgency and expedition in accordance with Standing Order number 75 of the Senate Standing Orders, and make a report to this Honorable Senate as soon as may be practicable as a result of the result of its inquiries, with all such comments and recommendations as the committee may deem fit, furnishing this Honorable Senate with a full statement of its proceedings and of the reasons leading to its conclusions and recommendations. That the report shall be tabled in this Honorable Senate and become a public document. All committee members shall be allowed sufficient time and equal opportunity to question witnesses and shall be permitted to question each witness who attends a sitting. Each witness shall be afforded the opportunity, pursuant to Standing Order 7213 of the Senate Standing Orders, to review his or her evidence and the findings of the report, and shall have the opportunity to suggest corrections due to inaccurate reporting within 14 days of the date from which the report was sent to the witness by the clerk. The committee shall be permitted to hire attorneys, accountants, and such other experts as required by the committee. The office of the Senate shall be the office of the Secretariat of the committee. That the committee be appointed consisting of 7 senators, as follows: 2 from those appointed on the advice of the Prime Minister, 1 from those appointed on the advice of the Leader of Opposition, the 1 appointed on the advice of the Belize Council of Churches and the Evangelical Association of Churches, the 1 appointed on the advice of the Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Belize Business Bureau, the 1 appointed on the advice of National Trade Union Congress and the Civil Society Steering Committee, and the 1 appointed on the advice of the non-governmental organizations. The senators who are members of the committee shall, at the first meeting of the committee, elect a chair of the committee, and the quorum of the committee shall be 4. Deputy Clerk, can you please ask the witness to come in? Thank you, Honorable Pat. The Deputy Clerk will administer the oath once more.
Select Committee. Touching the matters in question shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Morning, Honorable Pat. Let me first start off by again acknowledging your cooperation in assisting the committee in its work. We appreciate the time and everything that it takes to get here. So on behalf of our entire committee, thank you for arriving and welcome back to your council. Thank you. Would like to resume the questioning that we had.
Pointed out that the law does require that when the letter of invitation, if I can term it that, is served, that the witness ought to be offered some compensation for the expenses of the journey. It wasn't done the first time, it wasn't done the second time either. So I just put that on record.
Thank you. That is noted, and we will engage with Mr. Pat after the session to see what we can do there. Thank you. So yes, just to resume where we were at last occasion, Honorable Pat, it has been represented to us that there was a cabinet subcommittee for investment. Were you aware of that committee? Yes, it's on.
Yes, I was aware.
Okay. Were you a participating member of that committee?
No, I'm not sure.
So,
Hear the last part of the statement.
his statement?
You could repeat it, sure.
Sorry, could you please repeat? The senator didn't hear your response.
I was not part of any meetings of that particular.
But you were aware of the committee?
Yes.
Okay. And to the best of your recollection, who was on that committee?
I just think that I was never, while I knew that there was this committee, I didn't put any kind of interest as to whether that committee was functional or any member there.
So what did you know of that committee beyond its existence?
All I knew was that there was an investment committee. That's it.
Your colleague has appeared before the committee and represented to us that you were a committee member. Is she mistaken?
Yes, I was, but I did not participate in that.
So, okay, so that's an amendment. You were a member of the committee, but you did not participate?
Yes, no.
Okay, can you tell us when you were appointed or volunteered to participate in that committee?
I could not get to the precise dates.
You can give us a range.
Probably this would be, I don't know, around mid-2018.
Mid-2018? Okay. And can you tell us why, if you were appointed, I'm sorry, just to clarify, you were appointed or you volunteered to be a committee member?
As I said, I think that at no point in time did I participate in any of those meetings, so I really didn't need any follow-up
Okay.
on that committee, nor the meetings that they had.
Okay. Can you tell us why you weren't able to participate in any of those meetings?
I really had a very busy schedule, so I just didn't know the
I'm sorry, there's a technical issue. Sorry. I apologize. We just want to make sure that there are no technical glitches. Could you repeat?
As I said, I did not attend any meeting.
So you got notices of the meetings, but you were either traveling locally or internationally, you were busy? Okay, and that was communicated to the committee?
As I said, whenever they would need to present invitations, but I don't want to have it
Time to get back to the
Sorry, I think your microphone has gone off. What? Can we suspend for 5? Do you need that suspension? Just try it one more time.
Is there no?
Yes.
Yes, so at no point in time did I inform the committee that I would not be participating.
Okay, so you never, they just would have had to have assumed that your absence was your absence.
That was the case, Madam Chair.
It's still not working? Okay, I profoundly apologize. We will suspend for 5 minutes just to give the technical team an opportunity to clear up this issue. Can you please test your mic once more, just so that we...
Hello, hello.
Yes. Apologies. Just to resume, Honorable Pat, your position is that you never attended any of the meetings, but you were a member listed on the...
That is the case.
And you would have received, continued to receive all the correspondence from members of that committee, any updates, any minutes, all related material of the committee you did have access to throughout?
It would have been sent to me, but as I said, I didn't have time at the moment. I did not have the time, so
Yes.
I just did not get to read any of those correspondences that were sent to me.
But you had access to them?
Yes, I would have
Yes.
had.
Okay. Senator Herrera?
Good morning again, Mr. Pat, and thanks for your presence here again this morning. I'd just like to maybe get a little understanding of your role and your functions at the Ministry of Lands when you were minister. Can you maybe tell us what period you were Minister of Lands, or minister responsible for lands?
Was the Minister of Natural Resources. I was from 2018 to 2020, merely exercising my duties as the Minister of Natural Resources then.
Yes, sir. Could you maybe tell us what those duties were?
My role would have been as a supervisor to the ministry. Other than that, it was a ministry that had processes in place, and there were different officers who occupied certain responsibilities, and so I was merely the kind of I had a supervisory role at that ministry.
In terms of supervisory role would also include approvals. Someone wants to purchase a property. Would you be the person to approve that purchase?
Any recommendation that, any application that had gone through the process and after that vetting process had been completed and it was recommended, yes, I was the one to approve upon the recommendations.
Did you approve leases?
Yes, I did approve leases.
And you approve titles as well?
So we made approval for purchase prices.
You're the only one who would have been able to approve, give those approvals, or is that something that you could have delegated to someone else?
Whenever applications were submitted, the process was very straightforward. I mean, applications were received, and from there it made it through the process, eventually reaching to me. As long as the application was recommended and it had met all the requirements, then it was approved.
Thank you, sir. What would have been some of those requirements, sir?
I could not have, I could not get into the details, but off my mind, I could tell you that as long as the person was a Belizean, that person could apply. And the other one, very important for the ministry, was that whenever a parcel of land was applied, the ministry had to ensure that the land was national land in order for it to be processed.
For the purchase of title for those properties, would there have been requirements such as some development needing to take place on those properties?
In terms of the requirements, I mean, they had officers in place that were assigned responsibility to make sure that any application that was submitted, that it had the necessary requirements, so that any application that made it up to our offices, it's because those applications had met the requirements necessary.
Who would have been the person to vet those requirements or make sure that all those requirements were met?
As much as I could say is that there were officers in tasked with ensuring that there were that the necessary documentation was in place, and there were levels, so that at every step, an officer had to ensure that whatever was required in the office before was met, and it was basically it was a step-by-step process that needed to be followed.
Would it be accurate to say, other than yourself, who would have signed the final approval, that the person who would probably be ultimately in charge of ensuring that that process was followed would have been the commissioner of lands?
Actually, you had officers and supervisors at different levels, so that at every step of the way, there were officers there to ensure that everything was in place before it went to the other step.
When you get a file, sir, is there one person you could hold responsible and saying like, hey, not all the requirements were met on this file, or you'd have to go to each of those individuals and say who may have left something out and say, hey, you left something out, or is there one go-to person you would have for something like that?
The ministry has different offices countrywide, so that applications are accepted at every district, and so there are officers in each district at the reception level who would be able to guide each and every applicant as to what is needed for an application whenever they receive it.
So you're saying that the process was one that you could maybe describe as decentralized?
That is the case. Every district has the ability to accept applications. This is countrywide.
What role would the CEO play in this process, sir?
Well, actually, the CEO is the officer that basically oversees the entire ministry, so there is overall responsibility on behalf of the CEO.
Would that person see these applications?
Not to my knowledge.
Would the Commissioner of Land see these applications?
Yes, he would.
Normally, is it normal for applications to come in under the name of companies, or these would normally come in as name of individuals?
At the time, applications did come in the name of individuals, and there were instances as well where companies had applied.
Would you recall whether or not Portico had applied for lands under its own name?
Madam Chair. Certainly, the general questions that the Senator has asked, I understand and clearly my client does as well, the need for him to try to be helpful. But I must reiterate that once the questions become specific regarding Portico and any applications made in the name of Portico for lands, I think that's outside of the scope of the terms of reference, and so I would advise my client not to answer that sort of a question. Just a minute.
Thank you. Your position to your client is on the record.
Thank you.
We will continue as guided by our legal counsel in terms of the questioning. Thank you. Please proceed.
Yes, that's sorry. I mean, you certainly have the right not to answer a question you don't feel comfortable in answering, but I think it's my duty as a committee member to ask the questions and seek the answers for the things we're trying to investigate right now. Mr. Pat, on the issue of pricing, and this will probably be another general question. Could you maybe give us some idea of how the pricing is derived for these properties?
There was a system in place that had been there on practice since the 1970s. So that system was there, and all we did is basically follow on those. The methodology by which it was used is one that has been unchanged since the 1970s.
And that process then would have been what? Would it have been in compliance to the sheet? Can you share this with the former minister, please? Can you just? Would that be what you're referring to, sir?
I could not really tell you in terms of values. I was not the type of minister that micromanaged. As I said, there were responsibilities attached to officers at different levels. But if I can go further, Senator, I think in 2016 you and your family had gotten quite a chunk of land from the government, so that you would have known back then what the kind of price ranges would be. So that would give you a clear indication. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't recall getting any land from government in 2016, sir. So I don't know where you're getting that information from. But I'm asking about pricing. So could we just stick to that line of questioning, sir? Would those pricing, when you're looking at, since you're the approver of those properties, would you be able to tell or determine that something is maybe reasonable or not reasonable, normal or not normal with respect to the pricing?
I would not be able to get to the details, but from a general standpoint, I can tell you that the ministry had a social responsibility to make land available to all Belizeans. And so on the basis of that, the ministry took upon itself to come up with a methodology for determining the prices on land depending on the location and so forth.
Would there be times when you would not have given approval for an application?
Actually, from the time that we took on that ministry, one of the biggest cries that the general populace had was that the ministry was one that took very long for actually processing an application. So that at the time we made several structural changes to make sure that applications were processed in due time, and I could tell you that there were thousands of Belizeans that actually got their approvals within 1 day, and this is something that we moved as a matter of urgency for the benefit of thousands of Belizeans.
Would it be normal for one person to get more than one properties in a specific, maybe a tight time period, 2 weeks? 1 week?
We processed in 1 day, as is the current situation with the present administration, where they're processing applications in 1 day. So we started that process, and I think that process has been followed as we speak.
So you're saying that would have been a normal day, a normal thing?
as I said, thousands of Belizeans got their applications processed within 1 day. It's the services that we introduced and the structural changes that we made in the ministry to ensure that applications were processed in that fashion.
So those persons who are complaining that their applications are taking a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, would be out of the ordinary. That would not have been something that is normal within the department.
Bear in mind that at the time we had a log in terms of applications, and so we made every effort to process as much as we could. I could tell you that in one particular year, we processed over 11,000 applications, and so that in itself will speak as to the volume of work that we were doing at the time.
Those would have been mainly for lots, for acreages. What type of properties would go through maybe what you'd call that expedited process?
As long as the applications met the requirements, those were processed.
When you say process, you're talking about going from leasehold to title?
There were applications for leases and there were applications for direct purchases. The applicant was given the option whether they wanted to apply for a leasehold or if they wanted to apply for title in the case of declared land, and in the case of undeclared land, it would have been a fiat.
Would those persons, when persons are applying, would it be normal for them to meet with you, or that you would normally meet with those applicants?
There was a process in place. They had to follow the process. Each and every applicant had to follow the process.
And that process would be going through the whole process of applying, signing whatever paperwork, and then would that also include the surveying of those properties?
Every application had its required. They needed to meet the requirements as stipulated by the ministry. So whatever type of application that a person submitted, that person had to meet those requirements.
When these applications are made, is it normal? Would it normally be the government surveyors that do the surveying for these properties, or would it be private surveyors?
There would be instances when the government would run the costs of surveying, and there would be instances when when the persons had to consume the costs. I think at the time government, historically, whenever the government was in a position to make any kind of expansion, then the government would be in a position to actually run the costs.
What would prompt the decision for government to take on the surveying costs?
In the instances that, as far as I could comment, and if I could speak for my constituency at the time, Corozal North, whenever we made expansions, village expansions, then the government would have been the ones to actually run the costs, and there were instances when we had to partner with the applicants for to have the costs be met jointly.
Is there any type of transactions that would require cabinet approval or would need to go beyond you for approval or to get consent to approve?
There were times when the cabinet did require for applications to be sent to cabinet, but I don't recall of any instance as such.
Would that relate to maybe number of acres?
As I said, as long as the applicants had met the requirements, those were processed. In terms of what had to go to cabinet, as I said, there was no instance at the time that there was any need for us to carry anything to cabinet. From our standpoint, applications, once received, they had to go through what was required from the ministry. As long as those applications had met those requirements, those applications were eventually processed. And the applications that did not meet those requirements, those applications were simply rejected.
So during your tenure as minister responsible for lands, there was never an occasion where there was a need to take an application to cabinet?
Not that I could recall.
Can you state whether or not Mr. J. Chilin is a surveyor in the ministry?
I would not know. In terms of the minister those employed by the ministry, as I said, I did not used to micromanage, so I could not speak to that.
You said that a little earlier that the applications could be expedited to 1 day a week. It goes through very fast. You'd say that the majority of the time you were there, that's the way applications were treated?
Yes, actually, one of the initiatives that we did was the mobile clinics, and so that in itself called for the processing of applications, I could say, within 24 hours.
That would have been 24 hours after the application was lodged?
Yes, within 24 hours.
Those are my questions, right? Thank you, Mr. Pat. Appreciate it.
Welcome, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Herrera. Senator Bennett Moody.
Good morning, gentlemen. Just
Morning.
some follow-up questions from Senator Herrera. I'm interested to know exactly what is meant by a one-day application process. Did it afford for efficiency?
Means that any applicant at the time that we had our clinics could come into the area in which we were stationed and apply for a particular parcel of land. And when I say 24 hours, it's because if the ministry was in a position to process that particular application, as we did thousands, then the approvals were then the process was completed within 24 hours, and the person got an approval for his or her parcel that had been applied for.
Okay, so if I hear you right, or maybe you could clarify for me, are you saying that an application would have been submitted, it would have been processed during the land clinics, which meant that an application went in and the applicant would have been able to get a title? Is that what you're saying?
It's an approval, and at the time, all that we processed was approvals for leases and approvals for purchase prices. titles eventually went to another department, which I have no control over.
Another department in that ministry?
It went to the registry department. The registry department is charged with issuing titles.
Thank you for that. Having served as the former Minister of Natural Resources, I'm sure you would have seen areas of improvement that was needed, correct?
The ministry at the time was always open to getting suggestions as to improvement, and certainly that was the case.
So can you elaborate for us what were some of those improvements that were done during your tenure as minister?
Basically, services to the people, moving from areas where applications took from weeks to months, in some instances probably longer, to moving efficiencies to processing applications within 24 hours, from the time that the application was lodged to the time that the person actually got an approval.
Okay. If I hear you right, you indicated that your office as minister was supported to ensure that applications, etc., was expedited in a timely manner, correct?
Yes, there was a process in place which had been followed for quite some time, and all that we did is basically improve where it was necessary, but the processes in its nature, in its general form, remain the same.
Okay. So the support that you got afforded for applications to be legitimate, to be, or would have gone through the necessary process, the support that your office got as minister?
As I said, Senator, there was a process in place that allowed for officers to have their checklists at different levels. So that had to be met before eventually making it to our office.
All right, so my direct question to you, at any time did you delegate your authority as a minister to sign land documents for execution?
No, the process had to follow through the information system that is at the land department in place, and so the system wasn't that flexible for any modification or such. The system was standard. You had to do X, Y, and Z in order for an application to be processed.
Who is the last person to sign off on any document, land application, for it to be legal in the system?
The approvals were the last person to sign any approval would have been myself upon the recommendation for a yes approval after it had gone through the process.
Okay. So earlier you did indicate that you were very busy, sir, as a minister, and you were not able to attend the Cabinet's subcommittee for investment. During your time on foreign assignment outside the country, was there any other person assigned to sign those documents while you were out of country?
No, there was none.
Okay. What transpired with those documents during your leave out of country?
Pardon me?
What would have transpired with those documents that needed the final signature of the minister while you were out of country?
The application process would continue to the point where it would eventually be sent to my office. All applications had to be processed. The mere fact that the minister or anybody within the office was not present did not mean that any application would be stalled. There were mechanisms in place to ensure that applications were processed up to the point of reaching our office.
But the final signature is the minister's signature, is that correct?
Yes, that's the case.
Okay. Just as a point of information, did you, as the Minister of Lands, ascertain any land during your tenure?
What was the question?
Did you, as a Minister of Lands, ascertain any land during your tenure?
What does, I'm sorry, I'm not,
does
sorry,
ascertain
Senator,
mean?
what does ascertain mean in this country?
Obtain.
Oh, obtain. But again, Madam Chair, what does that have to do with the terms of reference of the committee?
You
There
can,
was, I think, some inquiry into the Ministry of Lands, and perhaps these questions were asked then, but how on earth would that come within the compass of this committee's terms of reference?
as we've agreed to, you can decline to answer the question.
As was, I mean, upon the advice of our attorney, I don't see the relevance of that question. And so, with due respect, Madam Senator, I will exercise my right as a witness to decline that
Okay, thank you.
question.
Having a national concern for what we're investigating at this juncture, at the level of the Senate, do you as a Belizean have concern for the Portico definitive agreement?
Look, all I can see at this point in time is what I said the last time I was there. I am here to, as best as possible, to assist the committee in answering questions that are relevant to the subject matter. I mean, in the case of Portico, as I said, all I can tell you is that I have absolutely no knowledge as to that definitive agreement that was signed. And all that I've heard is what has been said over the news. That is as much as I can say, Madam Senator.
So based on all that you have heard in the media, do you have any concern as a Belizean?
Please, I understand you said your senators can ask any questions. And you clearly are correct. But should not the senators try to focus their questions so that what is pursued is the objective set out in the terms of reference? What Mr. Pat's personal position?
Yes,
on Portico?
and you can advise him accordingly. Thank you, Counsel. Mr. Pat, can you please proceed to either answer or decline to answer the question? Thank you.
I don't see the relevance of that question to either the motion or the terms of reference, and so I will, with much respect, I will decline to answer.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bennett Moody. Senator Carl?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I will be directing my question to the Honorable Pat, and if his attorney have any concern, let him advise him accordingly. But my questions will be directed to Honorable Pat. Mr. Pat, earlier you mentioned that you play a supervisory role at your department. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator, that is the case.
And you also mentioned that you would be the last person to sign any approval.
That would be the case, Senator.
Before signing any approval, would you review these applications?
If I had taken the position to review and peruse each and every application, there would be no point in time where the ministry would have been able to move in the efficiencies that I had mentioned. And certainly I can tell you that we have very capable staff that at the ministry that are assigned tasks and would complete those tasks exceeding all expectations. And so I could tell you that I was not the type of person that would question the work of any of our staff. And so I relied upon them, and I enjoyed of their full support in terms of meeting what needed to be required in order for us to process the applications.
So are you
Perusing any, if you mind, perusing any application with that type of nitty-gritty would not have allowed for any minister to be able to process applications in the fashion that would be expected by the general populace.
Just for context, before taking over the ministry, did you acquaint yourself with all the processes when it comes to any land application, whether it be companies, lots, large parcel of land?
At the time that I was assigned at the ministry, at no point in time did I make any effort to go in at every office and actually find out what it is that each officer was assigned to do. My priority at the time was for us to deliver the kind of services in a timely fashion that the people of this country were expecting from us.
For context again, so you're saying that when you were appointed the Minister of Natural Resources, you went in there, and then also saying that you trusted all the processes and the staff that looked over all of these applications.
Those processes were in place. From time, I could tell you that the system that is there, the IT, was introduced in 2007, and that system has had some improvements within the structure, and there has been no major modification to the system that is in place.
And you trusted that process?
Yes, we followed on.
Even after the former Prime Minister saying that the Lands Department was a hotbed of corruption, you still trust that process?
Madam,
it's just for context.
I don't think that we need to go to that end. It's not relevant to the terms of reference or the motion. So, with due respect,
you have a right to you have a right to decline.
Madam Chair, he's answered.
Mr. Pat, what are the requirements, in your opinion, or at least the processes when companies apply for parcels of land?
As I had said, Senator, there were requirements in place so that there were officers who were assigned to take applications, and upon taking those applications, ensure that those applications met the requirements. So whosoever applied, I could not readily tell you what it is that was required. There were very capable people in place to make sure that those applications that were processed were those applications that actually met the requirements.
I will not name any specific port, but as you're aware, cruise tourism in Belize has been growing over the years. And for them to operate, they either need seabed or land for them to operate. At what point does your ministry get involved in any cruise tourism projects?
I do not see the relevance of your question, Senator, and with due respect, I will exercise my right as a witness to decline to answer. Thank you.
When you were Minister of Lands, is there any vetting of lands approval to persons as it relates to particular types of lands, for example, islands, riverfront, large tracts of land, and also in key tourism areas? Is there any vetting process?
I don't know how best I could explain to you, Senator. I cannot speak any other language than English and Spanish. I wish I could speak Maya and probably better express myself, or another language that would be easier for me to explain. There was a process in place that needed to be followed for every application, and so that process had to be met. Other than that, those applications would have been rejected.
I'm trying to understand the process, Minister Pat.
Senator, as I said, I was not the type of person that micromanaged, and so I was not there to supervise people at every stage of the way. The ministry then, as is now, has a structure in place where supervisory roles would be assigned, and you would have to depend very much on those persons and to ensure that whatever needs to be done or met in any particular application, that be the case.
While approving or signing off on these applications, would you review because as you're aware, our country needs all the taxes it needs for it to run. Did you review any of the costs or the approvals of costs for any lands?
In terms of evaluation of land, I mean, there are people in place that would ensure that, as I said, once applications are made and recommended, then I would have every full confidence that the officers in charge would have done their part of the work within the process.
So just to clarify, you would not review those valuations?
Senator, for you to have an idea, we processed in a particular year over 11,000 applications. That would give you an idea probably of the volume of work that we had to do at the ministry. So it would have been very much impossible for any person to actually review every part, every word, every single aspect of an application. It's a package that is sent on every application. So for me to have taken the time to go to the very details of any particular application would have been pretty much impossible.
While approving these lands, especially for companies, would it be a concern for you to have different companies applying at the same day and having the same directors? Would that be of concern to you?
Senator, whenever applications were accepted, it's because they had met the requirements. That's all I could tell you. Once those applications meet the necessary requirements, those were sent for processing. If any given application did not meet the requirements that the ministry had stipulated, then those applications would have been rejected.
I will ask the question again, Mr. Pat.
And I will answer you in the same fashion. I don't know what best I can do for you, Senator.
Would it not concern you that having several companies applying for adjacent land...
I advise my client not to answer because he has answered twice. He's already said, I've answered, I can't. He's trying to be helpful, but this is outrageous.
Madam Chair, bear in mind that there are questions that I'm answering that are not relevant to the motion or the terms of reference. I'm trying to be as helpful as possible, but it's difficult at times.
Mr. Pat, what was your information regarding the Portugal Cruise project?
Senator,
I'm just asking for the record, Mr. Pat.
I do not find that question relevant to the motion or to the terms of reference, Senator, and so I will exercise my right as a witness to decline to answer respectfully. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kal. Senator Bishop Benguche.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning to you, Mr. Pat, and your attorney. And just a few questions, perhaps seeking some clarification to some things you might have said, and perhaps just to ask some questions at the same time. Let me ask Mr. Pat, or perhaps just to seek some clarification. You indicated that you were a member of the Cabinet Subcommittee for Investment, but you did not attend any of the meetings. Am I correct?
Yes, Senator, that is the case.
Yes. Can I perhaps ask, since you would not have been able to attend the meetings for one reason or the other, was there any person appointed from your ministry who would have attended those meetings?
Not to my knowledge.
Thank you. You made a reference to the fact that insofar as the processing of applications, And there were many, as you indicated from your answer, that in any given year it could have been 11,000 less or plus. You also would have made mention, and correct me if I'm wrong, that apart or in your ministry, one of those persons who would have at least been able to look at those applications would have been the Commissioner of Lands. Am I yes or no?
Yes, actually, he was the one to have an oversight of the processes. Bear in mind that there were, as I will repeat myself, there were people in place with certain responsibilities to ensure that at that particular office or at that particular level, whatever was required by the ministry for any given application, that there were people to ensure that those applications that met the requirements before moving on to the next step of the queue.
So those persons would have also advised the Commissioner on any such applications. Am I correct?
Certainly, actually, in order for any application to move on to the following queue, that application had to have been vetted by the person responsible for that particular section, so that whatever application did not meet the criteria, then obviously the person in charge would have sent that application back for modification or amendment or whatever the case be, if it needed, no?
Another question, Mr. Pat. During your time that you served in the ministry, and as a part of the application process, can you, if you can answer, perhaps indicate if there would have been any application which came with the application itself for tax exemption of any sort?
The only time that I could indicate that there were this sort of tax exemptions, I think was when the people from the banana sector were applying for some sort of incentive that was taken to the House for approval, and this is part of the COVID stimulus package, if I may call it that way, that the government at the time was giving to the banana farmers in the particularly in the south of our country.
Perhaps my last question to you, Mr. Pat. You indicated previously in the line of questioning that would have been put to you, that you considered and you had confidence in the capability of those persons within your ministry. Is that fair enough?
Yes, we had very capable staff in ministry that ensured that whatever needed to be met then would have been complied.
Having said that, you would have also had, as you would have indicated, that perhaps a part of the policy that the government at the time had instituted, you would have had clear, and you would have approved the one-day applications for lease and or sale of lands.
Yes, we moved on to the types of services that would see the expedient processing of applications, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Bishop. Senator Herrera.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a couple of follow-up questions that I omitted to ask, specifically related to some information that came to our attention during the investigation. Mr. Pat, would you recall a company Keystar Limited?
Senator, with much respect, I don't see the relevance of that question, neither to the motion nor to the terms of reference, and so I will exercise my right as a witness to decline to answer.
Would you recall a company Fire Sky Limited?
With much respect, Senator, I will exercise. I do not see the relevance of your question to the terms of reference or the motion, and so I will exercise my right not to decline to answer.
Same question, Vision Project Limited.
I will reserve my right as a witness to decline to answer.
Alkaline Limited.
I will reserve my right as a witness not to respond to that question.
Building Blocks Limited.
Same answer.
Kill Switch Limited.
Same answer, Senator.
Build Zone Limited.
Same answer, Senator.
The common director in all those companies is an individual, Sanjay Hachandani. Would you be familiar with him, sir?
I don't find that question relevant to the motion or to the terms of reference, and so I will exercise my right as a witness to decline to answer with much respect, Senator.
Yes, sir. These companies, sir, have one thing in common. They have one common director. And these companies, on the same day, on November the 4th, 2020, got 9 50-acre parcels. Would you recall anything about those transactions on the same day?
I don't find that question relevant to the terms of reference or the motion, and so I will.
You would have approved those.
I will decline to answer.
Those transactions, sir?
I have stated my answer, Senator. Thank you, respectfully.
Earlier, you had said that you approve all transactions, and that's not delegated. So I'd have to take it that you had approved. You had approved all those 450 acres.
The statement there.
With that common director. Yes? No? Another thing that these properties all had in common, as Mr. Pat, is that they were all in a specific area, along with 8 other parcels measuring the same size. Would it appear maybe unusual that 17 parcels would come in the same day, all for the same acreage? That would be a general question.
I don't find the relevance of that question neither to the motion at hand nor to the terms of reference. But, Senator, at the time that you and your family applied for land in one particular area, did anybody or the minister at the time notice that you had made several applications for several parcels of land, probably within family members? I don't know.
But
Going to that, sir, I mean, I think you're throwing out a red herring, but I certainly have not applied for any lands from the government, so I don't know where you're getting that from. But if you want to throw it out again, let's go. I mean, I don't have an issue with that.
Senator, with much respect, I find the question not relevant to the motion or to the terms of reference, and so I will exercise my right to decline to answer. Thank you.
But I do think that you swore to be truthful to the committee, and I think what you throw there is very, very misleading and untruthful. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. That's absolutely not true. Again, I just wanted to follow up on those questions. Those were specifically related to the area, a specific area. And again, as a committee member reviewing the documents, I found it a little strange that all these parcels came in, all of them 50 acres, 17 of them, and 17 of them approved the same day by yourself, who would have been the person ultimately responsible for approving. That's it, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Bennett Moody.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Pott, we have on our file a copy of the Cabinet Subcommittee for Investments Project Assessment Checklist. We're going to present it to you, and I will ask if you have ever seen this document, having served as a minister in whatever capacity.
I do not, Madam Senator.
At no time during your career as a minister have you seen this document. Is that what you're saying, sir?
No, Madam Senator.
You had served as the Minister for Natural Resources between 2018 and 2020, is that correct?
That is the case.
And as a minister having the ultimate responsibility for that ministry, wouldn't a checklist of this level be of importance to your ministry, given the fact that investment in many cases require lands from Belize?
This would be an unrelated matter to the ministry. The ministry had its requirements in place, and that would be what at the time the ministry would follow in order for them to process any particular application.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Bennett Moody. Senator Bishop.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just one follow-up question, Mr. Pat. You had indicated that the final signature for any lease would be done by the minister. Am I correct?
That is the case, Senator.
Just for clarification, a question was asked earlier of you. Just in case, or let's say you were indisposed for one reason or the other, whether out of the country or otherwise, and that the signature of the minister was required. You had also indicated that it would have to await your approval. Am I to understand that it is upon your return that any such signature would be done for any lease or approval otherwise? Just seeking clarification.
At the time, I did not have any acting minister, so any application would have had to wait for my return.
Thank you. All right. Do you want to come up? I'm sorry. Thank you, Senator Bishop. Senator Kyle?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, can I ask you to share this document with the two gentlemen? Mr. Pat, we just shared some a document with you. And for context earlier, I asked you if, one, you were the last person to sign any approvals. And you said yes. Can you confirm that?
After recommendations that the approvals were in, everything was in order, and the recommendation was a yes approval, then I signed on to that.
And earlier you said that you did not also micromanage your ministry, and that you would not review these applications because you trusted these public officers that you have working at your ministry?
I said that I did not make any meticulous review of any application. There are people in place charged with every step of the process.
And earlier I also asked you about the valuation of land, and you said you would not meticulously review that as well.
There were people tasked with that particular aspect of the application.
So you would not review it.
Certainly not in the case of what had been properly done by our officers.
Okay, so you just sign off the recommendation.
If I can answer you generally, Senator, any application that was lodged at the ministry, at the different offices in the district, as long as those are received and had met all necessary requirements that the ministry at the time had, those applications eventually would reach to my office with the recommendation of a yes approval.
Mr. Pat, I will read the document for you, and you can also see it for your reference. And the reason why I ask about the tax, because we have a document here, and obviously these titles were issued to these individuals, companies, during your term in office. And I will read it for the record, and I would like for you to verify if you, at any point you signed off on these documents. I will start with the name of the company, Keystar Limited, directors, Sanjay Hatanjani of 2236 Albert Oy Street. This was issued on November 4th of 2020, an acreage of 50.1 acres at a purchase price of $33,193. Our record also shows that this company sold this parcel of land for only $15,000, roughly 50% less of the acquiring price from the government, to One Portico Enterprise Limited. Are you aware of any such application and approval of this land?
Senator, I don't see the relevance of your question to the motion, the definitive agreement, and with much respect, I will exercise my right as a witness to decline to answer.
We respect your right. I will move on to read Fire Sky Limited, Sanjay Hatanjani, 2636 Albert Oy Street, issued on 4th of November 2020, 50.4 acres of land, sold to him for $5,300, and he sold it to Portico Enterprise Limited for $15,000. Again, this was approved on November 4th of 2020 during your tenure.
I do not find your question relevant to the definitive agreement, and so I will exercise my right with much respect to decline to answer it. Thank you.
I will continue reading the document. Vision Project Limited, Sanjay Hatanjani, 2236 Albert Oy Street, November 4th, 2020, 50 acres of land sold by the government for $5,300 and sold to Portico Enterprise for $15,000.
I do not find your question relevant to the definitive agreement, and so I will exercise my right as a witness to decline to answer. Thank you.
Do you recall any of these applications coming to your desk or even signing off on the recommendation?
I do not find your question relevant to the definitive agreement, and so with much respect, I will decline to answer your question. Thank you.
Building Blocks Limited, directors, Sanjay Hatanjani, 2236 Albert Oy Street, issued on 4th November 2020, 50.1 acres of land, sold for $5,300. Are you aware of any applications from, or you signing any applications for Building Blocks Limited.
I do not find your question relevant to the definitive agreement, Senator, and so with much respect, I will decline to answer it. Thank you.
Kill Switch Limited. Directors Sanjay Hatanjani, 2236 Albert Oy Street, issued on 4th November 2020. 50.1 acres, sold for $5,300. All of these are located on east of Northern Lagoon. Any of these applications you can remember?
I do not find your question relevant to the definitive agreement, and so with much respect, I will decline to answer it. Thank you.
Build Zone Limited. Directors Sanjay Hatanjani, 2236 Albert Oy Street, issued on November 4, 2020. 50.1 acres of land, purchased for $5,300 east of Northern Lagoon, was sold to Portico Enterprise for $15,000.
I do not find your question relevant to the definitive agreement, and so I will exercise my right not to answer with much respect. Thank you.
9 Enterprise Limited. Directors Sean Duncan, David Morales, again issued on November 4, 2020. 50.1 acres of land, sold for $5,300, again east of Northern Lagoon.
I do not find your question relevant to the definitive agreement, and so I will exercise my right not to answer with much respect. Thank you.
9 Enterprise Limited. Directors Sean Duncan, David Morales, issued on 4th November 2020. 50.1 acres, for $5,300, again location east of Northern Lagoon.
With much respect, Senator, I do not find your question relevant to the definitive agreement, and as such, I will decline to answer. Thank you.
Vision Project Limited. Directors Sanjay Hatanjani, 2236 Albert Oy Street, issued on 4th November 2020. 50.8 acres of land, sold for $5,300 east of Northern Lagoon.
I do not find the question relevant to the definitive agreement, and so I will decline to answer with much respect. Thank you.
Kill Switch Limited. Directors Sanjay Hatanjani, 2236 Albert Oy Street, issued on 4th November 2020. 50.9 acres, sold for $5,300 east of Northern Lagoon.
I do not find the question relevant to the definitive agreement, and so with much respect, I will decline to answer.
As a minister, are you concerned about these parcels of land being issued to these companies, different companies with the same directors, issued on one date, which is November 4, 2020, under your tenure, sold at the price of $5,300, all on east of Northern Lagoon? Are you concerned about these parcels of land given to such directors or companies?
Your question is not relevant to the definitive agreement, and so I will decline to answer with much respect.
On the valuation sheet, Mr. Pat, that was shared to you earlier, I would like to refer you to, if you can have a look at the paper, please.
Madam Chair, I have indicated that this is irrelevant to the motion or to the terms of reference, and I will not have a look at it. I have been very generous and cooperative as much as I could with this committee, Madam Chair, but to be honest, I have not been questioned anything about the definitive agreement as it relates to the terms of reference or the motion.
Mr. Pat, if you don't want to read it, I will read it because the general public is interested in this issue, so I will read it on the record. So the valuation given to us by the Lands Department.
Chair, isn't that you're conducting
Sorry, Counsel. Sorry, Counsel. Please advise your client to respond when the time comes. Thank you. Go
I will
ahead,
continue,
Senator.
Madam Chair. For the Belizean people to know, we got a document from the Lands Department that was shared to you that you don't want to read, but I'll read it out for you.
Please advise your client.
Coastal
Attorney.
land lots are usually sold or valued at $4,000 per acre. And all of these lands that were issued at east of Northern Lagoon were sold for $5,300. So let me just do the maths here. So 50.1 acres at
Thank you. Honorable Pat can indicate to the committee how he would like to respond to the questions, and then we will proceed on there.
Mr.
Thank
Pat,
you.
with simple maths, based on the valuation given to us by the Lands Department, 50.1 acres of land on coastal lands is valued at $200,400. And all of these were only sold for $5,300. To me, that sounds like a lot of revenue lost by the government of Belize during your tenure, because all of these land, again, I will read, were issued on 4th of November 2020. Does that concern you at all?
Madam Senator, while the question is relevant to the definitive agreement, I will have to state for the record that the social rates that the ministry applied then have been there for time immemorial. It is not something that I instituted. But I will tell you this, as a Minister of Land, as the former Minister of Natural Resources, I cite as my duty to make sure that each and every Belizean gets a parcel of land at very affordable and social rates. That's all that I will say at this point in time.
I will just follow up on your comments, Mr. Pat. There are thousands of Belizeans right now without a piece of land. Not even a lot, not even 100 by 80 feet lot. But we have these companies with one directors getting hundreds of acres of land, prime land, at the value of over 200,000, and we're only given, and they only paid 5,300. And you're absolutely right that a lot of Belizeans should be entitled to land. But is it fair for the Belizean people right now who do not have a piece of land, and yet we have these people getting their land approval in 2 weeks and paying at 5–10% of the value, at least the valuation that was given to us by the ministry? During your term as minister,
Madam Chair, that's not a question.
That is not, that's a statement that the Senator is making. I took my time to read that motion and the terms of reference. It has nothing to do with this, and it's not a question.
I was only asking if it doesn't concern you, Mr. Pat. I said that initially, I asked that initially, and then I went on to say what I said.
That's irrelevant to the definitive agreement, and as such, Senator, I will, with much respect, I will decline to answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pat.
Thank you, Senator. I know we've been at this for a little bit. Would you like a break or some water or anything? I think we're about done, so I'm just checking. Yes. I just have a few for myself, Honorable Pat. The committee has been given documents that indicate that on 4th September there was a cabinet subcommittee meeting for investments. I'm sharing the details just in case it helps you with the recall, because I know you said you were a member but you never attended. But I just want to limit the back and forth as much as we can ahead by asking you this directly. This agenda and minutes are indicating that September 4th, you did attend a meeting at the Belize Bureau of Standards Conference Room, Power Lane, between 9:45 and 1:26 p.m. Are you saying that is inaccurate, or would you like to caveat your response in saying that you may have attended some meetings and you can't recall? I'm just for clarification, because this document is saying that you were there in the room.
I did not attend any meeting.
Okay, I just want to make it absolutely clear that that is your position there. When you were serving between 2018 and 2020 as Minister of Natural Resources, given the importance of this ministry, what was the guiding document, if it wasn't through the Cabinet Subcommittee for Investment, what was the guiding document for you in terms of making sure that land was being issued in places that did not overlap with planned investments or what your administration had determined would be feasible? What was the guiding document that you applied, or policy that you applied?
The ministry at the time had the requirements and systems in place to ensure that.
No, but I mean the policy, was it, we're aware that Horizon 2030 was there in terms of a development plan. Like, what was the investment policy, you as a minister of government and the cabinet, what was the development policy that you were applying in doing your duty?
I was the Minister of Natural Resources. I was not the Minister of Investment, and so whatever at the time document or policy was there, it was merely from stemming out of the Ministry of Natural Resources, and that's precisely what we followed.
But is it then that it was operating in silos? Because how could you be then, how could you be operating as Minister of Natural Resources and perhaps inadvertently impacting in a contrary way other work, other policies, other decisions from your colleagues? So I'm sure there was a cabinet discussion in terms of how we were going to develop as a nation. This 2030 plan was drafted, was existent, was ratified. So, but I'm just curious in terms of how you were applying any of those documents. Were you working with Bell Trade? Was it conversations directly with your ministerial colleagues? I'm just trying to understand how decisions were being made, or if this was a paper-to-paper scenario where you were trusting your systems around you and just executing these documents.
That would be the case.
So any paper that was brought before you, you just signed?
As long as applications had met the necessary requirements and the recommendation was for IS approval, then I sign off on those applications.
Okay. You recognized earlier that the ministry had certain reputations. One of them was that things were taking very long. What was it that you relied on as minister to protect your signature, to protect yourself in terms of the controls that were in place to make sure that you weren't being, for lack of a better term, set up? That you could trust the system? What was in place, or who was in place that you trusted so that you, when those papers came, you could just sign?
Madam Chair, the system is automated so that there wasn't much room for any modification in terms of generally changing the way in which applications were processed. And so I had to rely on the system and the people charged to ensure that whatever was needed at the time of any application that was launched, that it was met, and from there we moved on.
So all the documents you were getting was coming, because I'm imagining paper, but since you're saying automated, this was an electronic signature being applied to the documents? How was it? Were you getting printed copies to sign, or were you getting e-signature documents?
Any application that made it to our office had to be inputted to the system. The system operates in such a way that applications had to be filled out manually, and those had to be eventually transferred into the system for follow-up.
But were you putting a wet signature on paper and that being scanned and uploaded, or were you applying an e-signature to any documents that your signature appears?
Yeah, right. There are people at every level, Madam Chair, so that at any given queue, there will be people charged to ensure that any application had the required documentation, and so it would.
Yes, no, I understand that position. No, I'm asking you though, were you physically signing with a pen on paper these documents, or were they coming to you on a device and you were approving electronically?
No, those came physically to us.
Physically, okay, thank you. Given your stated position that you weren't at these meetings, outside of those meetings, did you have occasion to be present at any other meetings, including cabinet, when the chair of the cabinet subcommittee would have been making updates and reports to the committee on the status of any of these large investment plans that were in the works?
There were discussions at the level of cabinet, but it was basically updates. That would have been about it.
So you would have gotten some update in terms of things in the works at the time, including Portico having applied for certain things to be done and that was in process. You would have been aware of the Portico development in that way?
Those would have been taken to cabinet, yes.
Yes, and you would have attended those meetings where those updates would have been, so that the name Portico would not have been unfamiliar or strange to you.
As I said, Portico, I've heard it through the news, that's about it. It was a concept at the time, that's all I can tell.
Yes, but that's what I'm trying to get to. At no time were you present at any meetings where you would have been apprised officially, outside of public broadcasts, that Portico was a proposal in place and that conversations were happening, MOUs were being signed?
Not as such.
So only through the news you were aware that Portico was a thing, was an entity?
As I said, it was brought in, discussed at the level of cabinet, but that would have been about it. It's not that I would get into details finding out who is investing or who's not investing or what concepts are being brought to cabinet. That did not fall under my purview.
So is your position to us that you weren't even aware of where this proposed development would have taken place physically?
I did not know.
But you knew it was a port, so it would be on the coast?
All I can say, it was the concept at the time.
Yes, no, but I'm asking about geography. You would have known that it would have been proposed for somewhere in Belize.
As I said, that was from a general standpoint. That did
Okay.
not fall under my purview.
Okay. So your official position to us is that you were not aware at any point up to 2020 November that that port project was set in a particular area for the country?
I did not know.
That it was being discussed. Okay. I just want to clarify because we will be making statements, as your attorney has alluded to, in a report, and I just want to make it absolutely clear that that is your position to us. You didn't know that. The committee has a copy of the document that says it was signed October 1st, 2020. Just for the record, were you aware at the time that such a document had been signed by one of your colleagues?
I was not aware. What was signed in 2020? I don't get your question clearly.
The document titled Definitive Agreement was signed and dated as October 1st, 2020. I'm just asking for the record, were you aware at any point that that was leading up to be signed, had been signed, before or after the fact?
I have no knowledge.
Okay. Officially or unofficially? Informally or formally?
I don't have any knowledge of that.
Thank you. Just making sure. Timing-wise, the elections took place November 11, 2020. Do you recall up to what date you were still applying signatures in your capacity as Minister of Natural Resources?
I was in and out in the ministry. Leading into election, I had to attend to my constituency and signing, taking care of the ministry then, so it would have been an alternative time for me.
So, but I'm asking, it would have been, I am understandable that you're trying to say that it was a very busy time. I'm just asking, since it was a physical signature, you would have been in office up until what date?
I couldn't really tell you what day. It was alternative. There were days that I was in, and there were days that I had to attend to my constituency. But legally, I was the Minister of Natural Resources up to then.
So the committee can then be led to believe that up to maybe November 10th, you were still applying signatures to the documents?
I can't really tell you with exactness which days in particular I signed or not.
Okay.
As I said, it was alternate. I had to be in my constituency, I had to attend to other duties, and at the same time take care of the ministry.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm here squinting. And just to verify, when you assumed the ministry, you did not get any handover notes, there wasn't a transition period, you said you just came in and started to sign? Is that what we are to interpret?
No, obviously the staff there would acquaint you with generally the ministry itself. But to say that there was an official handing over this and that didn't much happen. I mean, everything was in place, the systems were there, so it's basically a follow-up on what had been there in place from time immemorial.
Yes. No, but I'm just making sure I understood that you did, when you came in as minister, things continued with who was doing what where. You didn't take the opportunity, or sorry, let me clarify. You did not intervene in changing anything or making any recommendations or seeking to identify if there was anything that could have been strengthened or changed for whatever reason. I'm just verifying that is the case. You allowed the system to continue as it had been previously?
We improved, we introduced efficiencies that allowed for expedited processing.
Okay, and that was through your direct intervention?
To the general public.
Okay, and that was through your direct intervention?
That was part of the team's effort.
Okay, so you and your team at that, okay. And just one last question from me. I heard you mention several times that you didn't micromanage. If you had to describe your managerial style, what would have been an appropriate descriptor?
Madam Chair, given the urgency of having to process applications, I really had to depend on the very capable staff of the ministry to continue to do what they were doing. And so all I had asked from our staff was merely to give more of their time in order for us to be able to accomplish the goals that we had set. And we got that from the staff to the tune that we saw the improved deliverance of our services to the general public. And so from my end, I went there to work with the systems that were there, improved it to the extent that we saw improvement or a fast tracking and delivery of services. But from the point of managing, I work with every officer in the ministry to ensure that we delivered the services that the Belizean public so expected from us.
So if anything did go sideways, it was the system, not the people?
As I said, the system is there. Merely, you had to do what the system allowed you to do. There wasn't any kind of availability on behalf of any particular officer to say that I would do something outside the system. The system was designed in such a way that you had to follow what was there.
Thank you. Unless there are any further questions, we do want to thank you for your generous giving of the time today, and the Office of the Clerk will be following up with you on that other matter that your counsel raised at the outset, so we will resolve that before you leave. And I hope that you will be similarly cooperative if we need, for whatever reason, to contact you any further, that you will be helpful to us. And we wish you safe travels home.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The committee stands suspended. The public hearing is suspended.